In Salt Lake City, a recently widowed grandmother was about to prove her family devastatingly wrong. What started as a family dinner took a shocking turn when her granddaughter called her technologically hopeless. Meredith Williams wasn't your typical 67-year-old. For decades, she had been a librarian and family protector, known for her intelligence and determination. When she encountered their dismissal, she had no idea she was entering dangerous territory. Meredith's quest for relevance would escalate from computer classes to grade hacking and digital surveillance, transforming grandmotherly love into cyber-stalking. That would nearly destroy the family she was desperately trying to save. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The meatloaf sat cooling in its ceramic dish, steam rising in lazy spirals that nobody noticed. Meredith Williams smoothed the tablecloth one more time, her fingers tracing the familiar pattern of roses that Harold had always said reminded him of their first apartment. 6 months. 6 months since the funeral, since the last time this dining room had felt truly alive with conversation, instead of the hollow ping of notifications and the soft glow of screens. "Dinner's ready," she called, though her voice barely carried over the electronic symphony emanating from the living room. Sarah's phone buzzed with what sounded like a conference call bleeding through her earbuds. David was muttering at his laptop about some server configuration. Jake hunched over his phone, thumbs flying across the screen with the precision of a concert pianist, while 13-year-old Emma sprawled on the carpet, simultaneously watching something on her tablet while texting on her phone. They assembled, around the table like reluctant actors taking their marks, devices clutched in hands or positioned strategically beside plates. Sarah glanced up from her phone long enough to say, "Smells great, Mom," before diving back into what appeared to be an urgent email thread. David at least managed to put his laptop aside, though his smartwatch continued to pulse with notifications that drew his attention every few seconds. "How was school today?" Meredith tried, ladling mashed potatoes onto Emma's plate. The girl's eyes never left her tablet screen. "Fine," Emma mumbled around a bite of meatloaf, her attention absorbed by whatever video was playing. Something with loud music and rapid-fire dialogue that made Meredith's ears ring. Jake's phone buzzed. He grabbed it immediately, his face lighting up in a way that made Meredith's chest tighten. When was the last time she'd seen that expression directed at anything happening at this table? "Chemistry test went okay, I guess," Jake offered belatedly, though he was already typing a response to whoever had texted him. "Mr. Peterson says we'll get our grades back tomorrow." Meredith nodded, filing away the information. Jake had been stressed about chemistry lately, staying up late studying, though she'd noticed he seemed more anxious than usual. She wanted to ask more, to dig deeper, but the moment had already passed. Jake was lost in his digital conversation, and Emma had moved on to a new video. The silence stretched, filled only by the soundtrack of modern family life. Notification chimes, keyboard, clicks, the soft swipe of fingers across glass. Harold used to tease that their dinner table sounded like a NASA control room. Now it just sounded empty. Meredith reached for her tablet, the one Sarah had bought her last Christmas with the promise that it would help her stay connected. She'd been practicing, slowly, patiently, though the device still felt foreign in her hands. Tonight, she had a purpose. She wanted to show them the photos she'd been organizing, pictures of Harold with the children when they were young, family, vacations, birthday parties, memories that might bridge the gap between then and now. The tablet's screen flickered to life, displaying her carefully arranged photo albums. But when she tried to open them, nothing happened. A message appeared. "No internet connection." "The Wi-Fi," she said aloud, her voice uncertain. "I think? How do I connect to the Wi-Fi?" Emma's sigh was audible even over her video. "Grandma, just go to settings and find the network name." It's Thompson 5G and the password is Emma 2010. Meredith's fingers fumbled with the interface, swiping in what she hoped was the right direction. The settings menu opened and closed, opened again. She could feel eyes on her, not helping, just watching with the particular brand of impatience reserved for the technologically challenged. Here, let me... Jake started to reach across the table, but Meredith pulled the tablet closer. I can do it, she said, though her voice wavered. The screen seemed to mock her, icons shifting and menus appearing and disappearing without her, understanding why. She found what looked like the Wi-Fi settings, saw the network name Emma had mentioned, but when she tapped on it, nothing happened. You have to tap on the little eye icon, David said, not looking up from his own device. Then enter the password. But there was no eye icon that Meredith could see. The interface looked nothing like what David described. She tried tapping various elements, growing more flustered as her family's attention began to feel less like help and more like scrutiny. God, Grandma, Emma said, her voice carrying that particular tone that teenagers reserved for the deeply incompetent. You're like technologically hopeless. The words hit Meredith with unexpected force. Not just the words themselves, but the casual dismissal, the way Emma didn't even look up from her own screen when she said them. Jake snorted with amusement, and even Sarah cracked a smile before catching herself. Emma, that's not nice, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was already turning back to her phone, finger scrolling through what looked like work emails. Meredith set the tablet down with deliberate care, her hands trembling slightly. Technologically hopeless. The phrase echoed in her mind, joining the chorus of other casual dismissals she'd accumulated over the past months. Too old to understand. Out of touch. From a different generation. She looked around the table at her family, her daughter absorbed in work, her son-in-law juggling 3 different devices, her grandchildren lost in worlds she couldn't access or understand. When had she become the outsider in her own family? When had her presence become something to be tolerated rather than welcomed? Harold would have known what to say. He'd always been the one to bridge the gaps, to find common ground, to make everyone laugh until they forgot why they were frustrated. But Harold was gone, and with him had gone her place as the heart of this family. Now she was just the old woman who couldn't work her tablet, who asked too many questions, who belonged to a world that no longer existed. The conversation moved on without her, such as it was. Jake mentioned something about college applications. Emma asked if she could sleep over at a friend's house this weekend. Sarah coordinated schedules and logistics, all while managing her email. David troubleshot a work problem over the phone. Meredith sat in the middle of it all, invisible. She served dessert, apple pie, made from scratch the way Harold had loved, and watched her family eat it while staring at their screens. The pie could have been cardboard for all the attention it received. When dinner was over, they scattered like leaves in the wind. Sarah kissed her cheek and mumbled about an early meeting. David helped carry dishes to the kitchen before disappearing into his home office. Jake and Emma vanished upstairs, presumably to continue their digital lives in private. Meredith stood alone in her kitchen, surrounded by the detritus of another failed attempt at connection. She ran water over the dishes, her movements automatic, while her mind churned. Technologically hopeless. The phrase had lodged itself somewhere deep, festering. She thought about Harold, about how he'd always encouraged her to try new things. "You're smarter than you think, Mer," he used to say when she doubted herself. "You just need to find your own way of doing things." But what was her way now? How did you find your place in a world that had moved beyond you? How did you connect with people who lived their lives through screens you couldn't navigate? As she dried the last plate, Meredith made a decision. It crystallized slowly, born from hurt and loneliness but powered by something deeper. The same determination that had carried her through raising 3 children. supporting Harold through his difficult years building the business, surviving. His death and the crushing loneliness that followed. She would not be dismissed. She would not be relegated to the role of the helpless grandmother who couldn't keep up. She would learn their language, master their tools, prove that she was still relevant, still capable, still worthy of their attention and respect. Tomorrow, she would start. She would find a way to enter their digital world, to understand their connections, to become fluent in the technology that had replaced conversation at her dinner table. She would surprise them all. Meredith Williams dried her hands on the kitchen towel Harold had bought her for their last anniversary. The one with the faded inscription, "World's Best Cook," and felt something she hadn't experienced in months: purpose, direction, the quiet satisfaction of a plan taking shape. She had no idea where this path would lead her, or how far she would travel down it before she found her way back to the light. All she knew was that she would not spend another dinner invisible, another evening relegated to the edges of her own family's life. They thought she was technologically hopeless. She would prove them wrong, no matter what it cost. Marcus Webb's hand moved across the whiteboard with practiced precision, sketching out the basics of email encryption, while 17 senior citizens squinted at their laptops through reading glasses. The fluorescent lights of Classroom 204 at Salt Lake Community College hummed overhead, casting everything in that particular institutional glow that made everyone look slightly jaundiced. "Now, the key thing to remember," Marcus said, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone who'd explained this concept hundreds of times, "is that your password is only as strong as your weakest character choice." Meredith Williams sat in the third row, her notebook filled with meticulous handwriting that would have made her old library supervisor proud. 3 weeks into computer skills for seniors, and she was already the star pupil, much to her own surprise. While her classmates, mostly widows and retirees looking to stay connected with distant grandchildren, struggled with basic mouse navigation, Meredith absorbed every lesson with the intensity of someone preparing for war. "Mrs. Williams," Marcus called out, and Meredith's head snapped up from her notes. "Would you like to demonstrate how to create a secure password for the class?" Heat crept up her neck, but she nodded. Public speaking had never been her strong suit, but after weeks of feeling invisible, being noticed, even in a room full of septuagenarians, felt like sunlight after a long winter. She stood and walked to the front of the classroom, her sensible shoes clicking against the linoleum. The other students watched with the kind of attention usually reserved for someone about to perform a magic trick. "The trick," Meredith said, her librarian training kicking in, "is to think of a phrase that means something to you, then modify it with numbers and symbols." She turned to the whiteboard and wrote, "Harold loved apple pie, just H10V3 DAP WP. Thursar." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the room. Mrs. Chen, who sat in the front row and still hadn't mastered copy and paste, actually applauded. "Excellent," Marcus said, and Meredith felt a flush of pride that reminded her of her teaching days at the library, when she'd helped patrons navigate the card catalog system, back when she'd been useful. That's exactly the kind of creative thinking that makes for good cybersecurity. As she returned to her seat, Meredith caught Marcus, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, interest maybe, or assessment. As a former cybersecurity professional who'd left the corporate world to teach, Marcus had a way of looking at people that suggested he was always evaluating their potential, for good or ill. After class, as the other students filed out discussing their weekend plans to video chat with grandchildren in Florida and Oregon, Marcus approached her desk. "You're picking this up faster than most," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "Have you considered the advanced course?" Meredith's pulse quickened. "Advanced course?" "Network security fundamentals. We cover firewalls, intrusion, detection, basic penetration testing." He paused, studying her face. "It's usually populated by IT professionals looking to update their skills, but you might find it interesting. Penetration testing. The phrase sent a little thrill through her, though she wasn't entirely sure what it meant. It sounded important, technical, the kind of thing that would make Emma's dismissive comments look foolish in retrospect. "I'd be interested," she said, trying to keep her voice casual. Marcus smiled. "Good. Fair warning, though, it gets into some gray areas. The same tools used to protect systems can be used to compromise them. The difference is intent." Intent. Meredith nodded as if she understood completely, though the full implications wouldn't become clear until much later. "When does it start?" "Next Tuesday. Same time, room 301. He gathered his materials. "Oh, and Mrs. Williams, you might want to practice what we covered today. Social media platforms are good testing grounds for new skills." That evening, Meredith sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, a sleek machine that David had helped her purchase, but which had mostly served as an expensive paperweight. The house felt different now, charged with possibility instead of emptiness. Through the window, she could see the Thompsons' house, lights glowing in every window as her family went about their evening routines behind their individual screens. Sarah thought she was attending grief counseling. The lie had come surprisingly easily when Sarah asked about her Tuesday and Thursday evening absences. "It's good that you're processing everything, Mom," Sarah had said, not looking up from her phone. "Daddy would want you to heal." The irony wasn't lost on Meredith. She was healing, just not in the way Sarah imagined. Each successful login, each mastered function, each new digital skill acquired, felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that had been lost in the month since Harold's death. Following Marcus's suggestion, she'd created a Facebook account, Meredith Williams, Utah. Finding Jake and Emma had been surprisingly easy. Their privacy settings were apparently more suggestions than barriers. As she scrolled through their posts, she felt like an anthropologist discovering a new civilization. Emma's feed was a constant stream of memes, selfies, and complaints about middle school drama. But it was Jake's profile that caught her attention. His posts told a different story than the confident teenager who sat at her dinner table. Hidden beneath the surface-level updates about basketball practice and weekend plans, she could see signs of stress. A deleted post about feeling overwhelmed. Comments on friends' posts that hinted at academic pressure. Photos where his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Her protective instincts stirred. This was her grandson, struggling, putting on a brave face while privately drowning. The fact that he felt he couldn't share his real feelings with the family, with her, stung more than Emma's technologically hopeless comment ever could. She was still scrolling when a chat window popped up. Emma, online and apparently noticing. Her new friend request. "Grandma? Is this really you?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Meredith's fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was it, the moment of truth. She could reveal herself, accept the inevitable patronizing comments about her cute attempt to join social media. Or, "Hi, sweetheart. Your old grandmother is finally joining the 21st century." The response came immediately. "OMG, I can't." "Believe you figured out emojis? Mom's going to die laughing." Something sharp twisted in Meredith's chest. Die laughing. At her expense, naturally. But she typed back, "I'm full of surprises. Don't tell your mom yet. I want to get better at this first. Your secret's safe with me, Grandma. This is actually pretty cool." Cool. When was the last time anyone in her family had called her cool? Meredith smiled at the screen, feeling more connected to Emma in this moment than she had across the dinner table in months. As she closed the laptop later that night, Meredith reflected on the day's lessons. Marcus had been right about intent. The same tools that could connect could also reveal. The The same skills that could protect could also penetrate. She thought about Jake's hidden struggles, about the gulf between his public face and private pain, about her own growing capabilities, and the trust her family had placed in her grief counseling fiction. Intent, Marcus had said. The difference between protection and violation came down to intent. Meredith Williams went to bed that night with her grandson's worried face in her mind and her instructor's words echoing in her ears. She had no idea that her good intentions were about to lead her down a path that would test every boundary she'd ever respected, every principle she'd ever held sacred. All she knew was that she was no longer invisible, no longer helpless, no longer hopeless. She was becoming something entirely new. Part 3. Digital Detective. The morning light filtered through Meredith's lace curtains as she sat with her laptop, a cup of coffee growing cold beside her. It had been 2 weeks since her first tentative steps into social media, and what had started as curiosity had evolved into something more methodical, more necessary. She'd created accounts across multiple platforms now: Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, though that one still mystified her, and even Snapchat, which seemed designed specifically to confuse anyone over 30. Each profile used slight variations of her name and different photos, making her virtually invisible to casual observation while giving her unprecedented access to her grandchildren's digital lives. What she'd discovered troubled her more each day. Jake's Instagram posts painted the picture of a confident high school senior. Basketball team photos, college prep updates, casual selfies with friends. But Meredith had learned to read between the pixels. The frequency of his posts had dropped off dramatically in recent weeks. Comments from friends went unanswered. Most telling were the posts that appeared briefly before being deleted, fragments of frustration and anxiety that he shared in moments of weakness before thinking better of it. Last night, she'd caught one before it vanished. When you study for 6 hours and still feel like you know nothing. College apps due soon and I'm falling apart. Nobody gets how much pressure this is. The post had been live for exactly 17 minutes before Jake removed it. 17 minutes of vulnerability that his parents had missed entirely, absorbed, as they were in their own digital bubbles during dinner. Meredith had screenshotted it, adding it to a folder on her desktop labeled Family Photos. A deliberate misdirection that felt both clever and slightly shameful. The folder now contained dozens of captured moments: Emma's deleted complaints about classmates, Jake's academic anxieties, even some concerning exchanges between Jake and his friends about finding ways to boost the GPA before applications are due. That last part had sent alarm bells ringing in her grandmother's heart. Boost the GPA? What did that mean exactly? Her advanced cybersecurity class had moved beyond basic password creation into more sophisticated territory. Marcus had introduced concepts that felt almost like magic: SQL injection, social engineering, privilege escalation, terms that made her feel like she was learning a secret language, one that unlocked doors her family assumed she could never even find. The most common vulnerability in any system, Marcus had explained during last Thursday's lesson, isn't technological. It's human. People reuse passwords, they overshare information, they trust systems that shouldn't be trusted. He demonstrated by accessing a mock school portal showing how administrative credentials were often laughably weak. School District 2023. He'd typed, and the system had welcomed him with open arms. They always use the current year, he'd said with a shake of his head. Every single time. The memory of that demonstration played in Meredith's mind as she navigated to the Salt Lake City School District's parent portal. She'd created an account months ago when Jake had first mentioned it, though she'd never had occasion to use it. Parents and guardians could monitor their students' grades, attendance, and assignments. A level of oversight that seemed both helpful and invasive. Jake's login credentials had been surprisingly easy to deduce. His username followed the standard format Marcus had shown them: first initial, last name, graduation year. The password had taken more work, but Meredith had learned to think like a teenager. Basketball jersey numbers, important dates, girlfriends' names. She'd worked through the possibilities systematically until Emma 2010 unlocked his account. The same password Emma had used for their home Wi-Fi. Marcus was right about people reusing credentials. What she found in Jake's academic records made her stomach clench with worry and something approaching panic. Her brilliant grandson, the boy who'd been reading at a college level since middle school, who'd always been the pride of the family's academic achievements, was failing chemistry. Not struggling, failing. A 43% average that would devastate his college prospects and shatter his parents' expectations. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the pattern of recent gradebook access from Jake's account, always late, at night, always followed by forum searches about changing grades and school system hacks. Her grandson wasn't just failing, he was researching ways to cheat his way out of it. Meredith sat back in her chair, her coffee now completely cold, her hands trembling slightly. This was exactly the kind of situation she would have handled differently in the old days. A frank conversation, a heart-to-heart about academic struggles, maybe a family meeting to discuss tutoring options and reduced pressure. Communication, honesty, the traditional tools of family problem-solving. But those tools assumed she still had a seat at the table. They assumed her family would listen to her concerns, value her input, treat her as something more than the technologically hopeless old woman who couldn't figure out her tablet. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Picking up groceries. Jake mentioned you might join us for dinner Sunday. Would be nice to have you there. The casual phrasing stung. Would be nice to have you there. As if her presence was optional, pleasant, but not essential. As if Sunday dinners hadn't been a Williams family tradition for over 30 years. She typed back, "Of course, dear. Looking forward to it." But, as she sent the message, another plan was already forming in her mind. Sunday dinner would be the perfect opportunity to observe Jake more closely, to see if her digital detective work matched the reality of his behavior, and if her suspicions were confirmed. Well, Marcus had taught them about more than just defensive cybersecurity. The school district's portal beckoned from her browser tab. Meredith had explored it thoroughly over the past hour, mapping its structure, understanding its weaknesses. The teacher interface was separate but connected, protected by what appeared to be slightly better security protocols, but only slightly. She thought about Jake's face at last Sunday's dinner, the way he'd deflected questions about school with casual lies that everyone had accepted because they were too distracted to probe deeper. She thought about the college application deadlines, looming the family's expectations, the crushing weight of disappointment that would fall on her grandson's shoulders when the truth inevitably emerged. Her fingers moved across the keyboard almost without conscious direction, navigating to the school district's staff directory. Mrs. Anderson, Jake's chemistry teacher, had a photo that showed a kind face and patient eyes, a woman who probably cared deeply about her students' success, who likely stayed late to help struggling kids, who deserved better than to be undermined by a desperate teenager trying to hack his way to better grades. But Mrs. Anderson wasn't Meredith's primary concern. Jake was. Her grandson, drowning in pressure and pride, too ashamed to ask for help, too frightened to admit failure. The boy who used to curl up next to her on Sunday afternoons while she read him stories, who'd always come to Grandma when his parents were too busy or too demanding. That boy needed protection, even if he didn't know it, even if it meant crossing lines she'd never imagined crossing. Marcus's words echoed in her memory. The difference is intent. Meredith Williams closed her laptop and walked to the window, gazing across the street at the Thompson house where her family went about their evening routines, blissfully unaware that their technologically hopeless matriarch had just spent the morning infiltrating their most private digital spaces. Intent, she told herself. Everything came down to intent. She intended to protect her family. She intended to solve problems before they destroyed the people she loved most. She intended to prove that age and grief hadn't made her irrelevant. The fact that her good intentions were about to lead her across ethical boundaries she'd never questioned before, that was something she'd deal with later. After Jake was safe. After her family was whole again. After she'd proven that Meredith Williams was anything but hopeless. The cursor blinked in the password field like a digital heartbeat, mocking Meredith's hesitation. She'd been sitting at her kitchen table for 20 minutes, the Salt Lake City school district's teacher portal gleaming on her laptop screen, her fingers frozen above the keyboard. The moral Rubicon lay before her, and she knew that once crossed, there would be no returning to the grandmother she'd been just months ago. Through her window, she could see the Thompson house settling into its evening routine. David's home. Office glowed blue from multiple monitors. Sarah's silhouette moved through the kitchen, probably preparing tomorrow's lunches while simultaneously managing work emails. Upstairs, Jake's bedroom window flickered with the changing light of whatever screen currently held his attention, her grandson, carrying a burden that was slowly crushing him. A 43% in chemistry that would torpedo his college dreams and devastate his parents' expectations. The weight of family pride balanced on shoulders that were still, despite his height, and basketball-honed confidence, the shoulders of a 17-year-old boy who'd never learned how to fail gracefully. Marcus's advanced cybersecurity lessons had covered social engineering in detail. People are predictable, he'd explained, demonstrating how to guess security questions by mining social media profiles. They use pet names, anniversary dates, children's birthdays. They think they're being clever, but they're actually following patterns. Mrs. Anderson's Facebook profile had been a goldmine of pattern recognition. Photos of her golden retriever, Max, featured prominently. Her anniversary. Posts mentioned 23 years of marriage. Her profile listed her maiden name as Rodriguez. The security questions practically answered themselves. Meredith typed Max 2000 into the password field, her heart hammering against her ribs. The screen flashed red. Incorrect password. She took a breath and tried Max Rodriguez. Another rejection. Then, remembering Marcus's lesson about common teacher password patterns. Max 2023, the current school year, combined with the pet's name and an exclamation point for complexity. The portal opened like a flower blooming in fast forward, revealing Mrs. Anderson's digital classroom in all its organized glory. Grade books, lesson plans, student communications, a teacher's entire professional life laid bare to someone who had no right to see it. Meredith's hands shook as she navigated to the chemistry gradebook. The interface was intuitive, designed for educators who had better things to do than wrestle with complicated software. Jake's name appeared in the roster, and beside it, the brutal mathematics of academic failure. Test scores in the 30s and 40s, missing assignments marked with zeros, a trajectory that spelled disaster in neat digital columns. But there, at the bottom of the screen, was salvation. A simple drop-down menu next to Jake's latest exam grade, the 31% that had dropped his overall average below passing. The cursor hovered over it, trembling like a divining rod over water. Intent, Meredith whispered to herself, Marcus's voice echoing in her memory. The difference is intent. Her intent was pure, protective, loving. She wasn't doing this for personal gain or malicious purposes. She was saving her grandson from the crushing shame of failure, preserving his college prospects, protecting her family from devastation. She was being the grandmother Jake needed, even if he'd never know it. The drop-down menu offered a range of scores. Meredith selected 78%, high enough to pull Jake's average into passing territory, low enough to avoid suspicion. Not perfect, just better. Manageable. A grade that would give him breathing room to actually improve instead of drowning in despair. She clicked Save Changes. The system processed her modification with bureaucratic indifference, updating Jake's overall grade from 43% to 61%. Still not good, but no longer catastrophic. The difference between failure and struggle, between shame and hope. Meredith closed the laptop with trembling hands and walked to her kitchen window. The Thompson house looked exactly the same, but she felt fundamentally changed. She'd crossed a line she'd never imagined crossing, violated trust she'd never thought to question, committed what was technically a crime in service of what felt like love. The next evening, Sunday dinner unfolded with its usual chaos of devices and distraction. But this time, Meredith watched Jake with the intensity of a scientist, observing a crucial experiment. Would he mention the grade? Had Mrs. Anderson noticed the change? Was there any indication that her digital intervention had been discovered? Jake seemed lighter somehow, though it might have been her imagination. He participated in conversation more readily, made jokes that actually made Emma laugh, even complimented Meredith's pot roast, something that hadn't happened in months. "Chemistry's getting a little better," he said when Sarah asked about school. "Got my test back and it wasn't completely horrible." Sarah's face brightened. "That's wonderful, honey. I knew all that studying would pay off." Jake nodded, and Meredith caught something in his expression, relief mixed with confusion, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "Yeah, maybe I'm finally figuring it out." David looked up from his phone. "What did you get?" 78%. "Not great, but way better than I expected." The pride in his voice made Meredith's chest tighten with a complex mixture of satisfaction and guilt. She'd given him that pride, that relief, that moment of feeling like maybe he wasn't completely hopeless after all. But she'd also given him a lie to live with, a foundation of deception that could crumble at any moment. "That's excellent progress," Sarah said, reaching over to squeeze Jake's shoulder. "Your father and I are proud of you for sticking with it." Emma looked up from her phone long enough to add, "See? I told you chemistry wasn't impossible." The family's happiness was infectious, their relief palpable. This was what Meredith had wanted, her family whole and hopeful instead of fractured by disappointment. Jake's college prospects were intact. His parents' expectations preserved, the family's academic reputation maintained. As she helped clear the dishes after dinner, Jake approached her at the sink. "Thanks for the study tips, Grandma," he said quietly. "About making flashcards and stuff. I think they really helped." Meredith's hands stilled on the plate she was rinsing. She'd given him study tips weeks ago, back when she'd still believed in honest solutions to difficult problems, before she'd learned how easy it was to edit reality with a few keystrokes. "You're welcome, sweetheart," she managed. "I'm proud of how hard you're working." Jake smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in months, and returned to his family. Meredith continued washing dishes, her movements automatic while her mind raced. The hack had worked perfectly. Too perfectly. Jake's grade was improved, his confidence restored, his family's faith maintained. And Meredith Williams had discovered something dangerous about herself. She was very, very good at playing God with other people's lives. The thought should have horrified her. Instead, as she dried the last plate and listened to her family's laughter drifting from the living room, she felt something she hadn't experienced since Harold's death. Power, purpose, the intoxicating satisfaction of being needed, of being the secret guardian angel who solved problems before they could destroy the people she loved. She had no idea that her first successful hack had awakened something that would prove impossible to control. The notification sound had become Pavlovian. Every ping, every buzz, every soft chime sent a thrill of anticipation through Meredith's system as she monitored the digital lives of her grandchildren with the dedication of a NASA mission controller. What had started as concern for Jake's chemistry grade had metastasized into something far more comprehensive and far more addictive. 3 weeks had passed since her first successful grade modification, and the intervening time had been a day masterclass in digital omniscience. Her laptop rarely closed now, positioned permanently on her kitchen table like a command center overlooking her family's electronic existence. Multiple browser tabs remained open at all times. Jake's Instagram, Emma's TikTok, their text message threads, their location data, even their friends' social media accounts. She'd become a digital archaeologist, excavating the buried truths of teenage life with the methodical precision her librarian training had instilled. Every deleted post was screenshotted before it vanished. Every concerning comment was cataloged and analyzed. Every pattern of behavior was mapped and interpreted through the lens of her protective paranoia. The tools at her disposal had grown sophisticated. Marcus's advanced course had introduced her to concepts that felt like science fiction. Keyloggers that recorded every keystroke, location trackers that mapped movement patterns, even software that could access deleted files and messages. What? He taught for defensive purposes. Meredith had learned to deploy offensively, though she preferred to think of it as proactively protective. Installing the monitoring software on Jake and Emma's phones had been surprisingly simple. A brief moment alone with their devices during Sunday dinner, a quick USB connection to her laptop, and suddenly she had windows into their most private digital moments. Their text messages flowed to her laptop in real time. Their photos backed up automatically to cloud accounts she'd created. Their location data painted precise maps of their daily movements. The ethical implications flickered occasionally through her consciousness like warning lights on a dashboard she'd learned to ignore. This was surveillance, yes. Invasion of privacy, certainly. But it was also love in its most vigilant form. The digital equivalent of a mother animal standing guard over her young. And what she'd discovered justified every boundary she'd crossed. Emma's middle school experience was a minefield of social cruelty that made Meredith's generation's playground politics look quaint by comparison. The cyberbullying was relentless and sophisticated. Fake social media accounts created specifically to torment her granddaughter. Group chats dedicated to spreading rumors about her appearance and social status. Even doctored photos designed to humiliate her. The perpetrators were led by a girl named Madison Hartwell, whose own social media presence revealed a disturbing pattern of targeting vulnerable classmates. Emma had been Madison's focus for weeks, enduring a campaign of psychological warfare that played out across multiple platforms with the systematic cruelty that only 13-year-olds could achieve. Emma's response had been to suffer in silence, her natural resilience gradually eroding under the constant digital assault. Her grades were slipping, her sleep patterns were disrupted. Meredith could track her late-night phone usage, the desperate, scrolling through social media feeds in search of new attacks to defend against. Most heartbreaking were Emma's deleted draft messages, attempts to reach out to friends or family for help, that she'd composed but never sent, too proud or too ashamed to admit her vulnerability. The traditional grandmother would have scheduled a meeting with the school principal, organized a conversation with Emma about healthy responses to bullying, perhaps even contacted Madison's parents directly. But Meredith Williams was no longer a traditional grandmother. She'd evolved into something more effective. The solution had been elegant in its simplicity. Madison's own digital security was laughably weak. The same password for everything. Social media accounts that shared far too much personal information. A complete lack of awareness about digital footprints. Meredith had documented Madison's bullying campaign meticulously, creating an irrefutable digital evidence file that she'd anonymously submitted to the school administration, the girl's parents, and even the local police department's cyberbullying task force. The effect had been swift and decisive. Madison found herself suspended from school, grounded at home, and facing the kind of consequences that made teenage social cruelty far less appealing. The bullying campaign against Emma had collapsed overnight, replaced by a cautious distance. That felt like peace. Emma's relief had been visible within days. Her smile returned, her sleep patterns normalized, her grades stabilized. She'd even mentioned to her parents how much better school was going. though she couldn't explain why her tormentors had suddenly lost interest in their campaign against her. Jake's situation had proven more complex, but equally manageable. His chemistry struggles were just the tip of an iceberg that included crushing anxiety about college applications, a secret relationship with a girl his parents wouldn't approve of, and a growing dependence on anxiety medication he'd been obtaining from friends rather than seeking proper medical help. The grade modifications had continued, carefully calibrated to show realistic improvement rather than miraculous transformation. A 78% here, an 82% there, just enough to keep Jake's GPA above the threshold that would preserve his college prospects. She'd even begun subtly improving grades in other subjects, creating a pattern of gradual academic recovery that filled his parents with pride and relief. But the medication issue required more delicate handling. Jake's text messages revealed a network of teenagers sharing prescription drugs like trading cards, Adderall for focus, Xanax for anxiety, even stronger substances when the pressure became unbearable. Her grandson was self-medicating his way through senior year, too ashamed to admit his struggles to parents who expected excellence and too frightened to seek professional help that might create permanent marks on his medical record. Meredith's solution had been characteristically indirect but effective. Anonymous tips to school administrators about specific students dealing drugs had disrupted Jake's supply chain without implicating him directly. Simultaneously, she'd begun leaving mental health resources around the house where Jake might find them: brochures about anxiety management, articles about college stress, even contact information for counselors who specialized in academic pressure. The results were encouraging. Jake's drug-seeking behavior had decreased as his access diminished. His grades, artificially improved though they were, had reduced his anxiety levels naturally. He'd even mentioned to his parents that he might want to talk to someone about college stress, a breakthrough that Meredith had orchestrated without anyone realizing her involvement. The monitoring had expanded beyond crisis management into general oversight. She tracked their location data to ensure they were safe, monitored their communications for signs of dangerous influences, even kept tabs on their friends' social media to identify potential threats before they materialized. Her laptop had become a mission control center for family protection, multiple screens displaying real-time data streams from the lives of people who had no idea they were being watched. Every notification was a potential crisis to be managed, every alert a chance to intervene before problems could take root. The power was intoxicating. She could solve problems before they became visible, prevent disasters before they occurred, protect her family from threats they didn't even know existed. She was the invisible guardian angel, the digital fairy godmother, the loving surveillance state of one. But power, even benevolent power, had its own momentum. Each successful intervention created the appetite for more oversight, more control, more comprehensive protection. The boundaries between loving concern and invasive surveillance had blurred beyond recognition. Meredith Williams sat in her kitchen on a Tuesday evening, surrounded by the electronic hum of devices monitoring her family's digital lives, and felt something she hadn't experienced since Harold's death: purpose. She was needed again, useful again. The indispensable problem solver who kept her family safe and happy through the application of skills they didn't even know she possessed. She had no idea that Emma had begun to notice the digital anomalies, the suspicious battery drain on her phone, the unfamiliar login notifications, the way her cyberbullying problems had resolved themselves with almost supernatural efficiency. She had no idea that her technologically savvy granddaughter was about to turn those same investigative instincts on the source of these mysterious interventions. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and Meredith Williams was completely unprepared for what would happen when her family discovered that their greatest protector had also become their most sophisticated threat. Emma Thompson had always been the kind of kid who noticed things. At 13, she possessed the particular brand of digital intuition that came from growing up with technology as a native language rather than a learned skill. So when her phone, started exhibiting strange behaviors. Her internal alarm system activated with the precision of a smoke detector, sensing the first wisps of danger. It started with the battery. Her iPhone, which typically lasted a full day even with heavy usage, began dying by mid-afternoon. At first, she blamed it on the usual suspects: too many apps running in the background, an aging battery, maybe some iOS update glitch. But when she checked her battery usage statistics, the numbers didn't add up. Something was consuming power in the background, something that didn't appear in her app list. Then came the login notifications, little security alerts that popped up at random times. Your account was accessed from a new location. Emma had enabled two-factor authentication on everything, a habit instilled by her father's constant lectures about cybersecurity. So these alerts should have been accompanied by authentication requests to her phone. But they weren't. Someone was accessing her accounts without triggering the security protocols she'd put in place. The most unsettling discovery was the resolution of her Madison problem. Emma wasn't naive about cause and effect. Madison Hartwell's sudden transformation from relentless cyberbully to cautious distance keeper hadn't happened in a vacuum. Someone had intervened, and that someone had done so with surgical precision and devastating effectiveness. Emma had heard through the school gossip network about Madison's suspension, her parents' fury, even rumors about police involvement. But what struck her as impossible was the timing and the thoroughness. Every piece of evidence against Madison had been documented and preserved with the kind of methodical precision that spoke to professional-level digital forensics. This wasn't teenage justice or random karma. This was an operation. She began investigating with the same systematic approach she'd learned from watching her father troubleshoot network problems. First, she documented the anomalies: battery, drain patterns, unusual network activity, suspicious login attempts. Then she started looking for digital breadcrumbs that might lead to the source. Her phone's activity logs revealed connections to IP addresses she didn't recognize. Her cloud storage showed access patterns that didn't match her own usage habits. Most telling of all, her social media accounts displayed viewing patterns that suggested someone was monitoring her feeds in real time, often accessing her profiles within minutes of her posting new content. "Jake," she said one Thursday evening, cornering her brother in the hallway between their bedrooms. "We need to talk." Jake looked up from his phone, his expression shifting from annoyed to concerned as he registered her tone. "What's wrong?" "Someone's hacking us," Emma said without preamble. "Monitoring our phones, accessing our accounts, tracking our activity. I've got proof." Jake's face went pale. "What kind of proof?" Emma pulled out her laptop and opened a file she'd labeled Digital Evidence, a folder that would have made Marcus Webb proud with its thoroughness and organization. She showed Jake the battery usage anomalies, the login notifications, the network activity logs that painted a picture of systematic surveillance. "This is professional-level stuff," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Whoever's doing this knows what they're doing. They've got monitoring software installed on our devices, probably keyloggers, maybe even location tracking." Jake sank onto Emma's bed, his phone suddenly feeling heavy in his hands. "How long has this been going on?" "Weeks, maybe months. I only started noticing because my battery has been dying so fast." Emma pulled up another set of screenshots. "But look at this. Remember how Madison suddenly backed off?" I dug into the timeline, and someone submitted a complete digital evidence package to the school administration the same day she stopped bothering me. Screenshots, chat logs, even metadata showing when and where each harassment incident occurred. "That's actually kind of awesome," Jake said slowly. "Someone took down your bully." "Jake, focus. Someone is monitoring everything we do online, every text, every post, every search. They probably know about—" Emma caught herself, realizing she was about to reveal more about Jake's private struggles than she should. But Jake's expression had already shifted to one of dawning horror. "They know about what, Emma?" "Your chemistry grade problems. The anxiety stuff, the other things. Emma's voice was gentle but firm. Whoever's doing this, they've been watching all of it. Jake's hands were shaking now. If someone had access to his private messages, they knew about the medication sharing, the grade manipulation research he'd been doing, even his relationship with Stephanie Chen, the girl his parents would definitely not approve of, given their complicated history with her family. "We have to tell Mom and Dad," Jake said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Tell them what? That someone cares enough about us to actually solve our problems?" Emma closed her laptop and looked at her brother seriously. "Jake, your chemistry grade mysteriously improved right around the time this surveillance started. My bullying problem disappeared overnight. Someone is actively helping us, even if they're violating our privacy to do it. That's not help, Emma, that's manipulation, control." Jake ran his hands through his hair. "Besides, who would even have the skills to do this? It's not like we know any hackers." Emma had been thinking about that question for days. The technical sophistication suggested someone with cybersecurity training, but the personal investment in their welfare pointed to someone who cared about them deeply. The combination was puzzling. Professional-level digital skills paired with intimate knowledge of their daily lives and genuine concern for their well-being. "It has to be someone who has access to our devices," she said, thinking out loud. "Someone who's been alone with our phones long enough to install monitoring software. Someone who knows our routines, our problems, our—" She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening as the impossible truth began to crystallize. "Emma?" Jake leaned forward, recognizing the expression on his sister's face. "What is it?" "Last Sunday," Emma said slowly. "At dinner. Remember how Grandma asked to see my phone? She wanted me to show her how TikTok worked, said she was curious, about all the videos we were always watching." Jake nodded. "Yeah, she had mine too. Asked me to explain Instagram stories or something. I thought it was sweet, like she was finally trying to understand our generation." "Jake." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "What if it wasn't curiosity? What if she was installing monitoring software?" The suggestion hung in the air between them like a soap bubble, beautiful, impossible, and destined to burst under scrutiny. "Emma, that's insane," Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Grandma can barely work her tablet. She's technologically hopeless, remember? You said so yourself." "Did I, though?" Emma was thinking furiously now, connecting dots she'd never thought to connect before. Or did I just assume she was hopeless because she's old? When was the last time you actually saw her struggle with technology? Really struggle, not just put on a show of struggling? Jake's memory went back, through recent family dinners, looking for evidence of their grandmother's digital incompetence. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that Meredith's technological difficulties were always perfectly timed, always occurred when the family was watching, always resolved themselves when she was alone. "She's been going to those grief counseling sessions," Jake said weakly. "Mom said she's processing Grandpa's death." "What if she's not?" Emma pulled up a new browser window and began typing. "What if she's been learning, training? What if everything we think we know about Grandma is wrong?" The siblings sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their suspicions settling around them like fog. Their technologically hopeless grandmother, the woman they'd dismissed as irrelevant to their digital lives, might be the most sophisticated cyber threat they'd ever encountered. And the most terrifying part wasn't that she'd been watching them, it was that she'd been helping them. "We need proof," Emma said finally. "Real proof, before we accuse Grandma of being some kind of digital ninja." Jake nodded, though part of him was already convinced. Too many coincidences, too many perfectly timed solutions to problems that had seemed unsolvable. If their grandmother really was behind this, then she'd been playing a game they hadn't even known they were part of. "How do we get proof?" he asked. Emma smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it wasn't the careful expression of someone being watched. It was the predatory grin of a digital native who'd just found her prey. "We set a trap," she said. "And we see if Grandma takes the bait." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Emma had crafted a fake crisis, a carefully constructed social media post about feeling overwhelmed by high school pressure, complete with vague references to needing help but not knowing where to turn. She'd shared it privately with only a few trusted friends, then deleted it after exactly 23 minutes, knowing that if their suspicions were correct, their digital guardian angel would have captured a screenshot before it vanished. Jake's contribution was even more devious. He'd sent a series of text messages to his friend Tyler about meeting someone who could help with the grade situation, deliberately vague but alarming enough to trigger protective instincts. Then he'd waited, watching his phone's battery drain, faster than usual as invisible monitoring software worked overtime to capture and transmit his communications. The response came within hours. Emma's guidance counselor called, expressing concern about her emotional state and offering support resources. Jake received an anonymous tip through his school email about a suspected academic fraud investigation, targeting several students in his grade, a warning that could only have come from someone with access to both his communications and the school's administrative systems. "It's her," Emma whispered to Jake as they stood outside their grandmother's house on Saturday afternoon. "It has to be." They'd told their parents they were visiting Grandma to help with some computer problems, a lie that felt increasingly ironic given what they suspected. Sarah had been pleased that her children were showing initiative in connecting with their grandmother, completely unaware that they were about to confront the family's most sophisticated digital operator. Meredith answered the door with her usual warm smile, but Emma noticed details she'd missed before. Her grandmother's clothes were more put together than usual, her hair recently styled, her overall appearance suggesting someone who'd been leaving the house regularly for something more important than grocery shopping. "What a wonderful surprise," Meredith said, ushering them into the living room. "To what do I owe this visit?" Emma and Jake exchanged glances. They'd rehearsed this conversation, but facing their grandmother in person made their suspicions feel both more real and more impossible. "We need to talk, Grandma," Emma said, her voice steadier than she felt. "About technology." Something flickered across Meredith's face, so brief that Jake almost missed it. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. "Oh?" Meredith settled into her favorite armchair, hands folded in her lap with practiced innocence. "I'm afraid I'm not much help with computer problems, dear. You know how hopeless I am with all that." "Are you?" Jake pulled out his phone and opened his evidence folder. "Because we've been having some interesting digital experiences lately." Emma took over, her presentation methodical and damning. She showed the battery drain patterns, the login notifications, the mysterious resolution of her cyberbullying problem. Jake added his own evidence, the grade improvements that correlated with surveillance activity, the anonymous warnings that had arrived precisely when he needed them most. With each piece of evidence, Meredith's composed facade cracked a little more. Her hands, folded so carefully in her lap, began to tremble. Her breathing grew shallow. But she maintained her innocence with the desperation of someone whose entire world was collapsing. "I don't understand what you're suggesting," she said, though her voice had lost its confident warmth. "You think your old grandmother is some kind of computer expert?" "We think," Emma said gently, "that you've been learning, that those grief counseling sessions were actually computer classes, that you've been watching over us, trying to protect us, and maybe got carried away." The words hung in the air like an accusation and an invitation simultaneously. Meredith could continue the deception, maintain the facade of technological incompetence, and hope her grandchildren lacked the evidence to prove their suspicions. Or she could trust them with the truth she'd been carrying alone for months. "I never meant for it to go this far," Meredith whispered, and with those words, the last of her defenses crumbled. The confession poured out of her like water through a broken dam. The computer classes with Marcus Webb, the discovery of Jake's academic struggles, the realization that her family's digital lives were an open book to someone with the right skills and the wrong boundaries. She told them about the grade changes, the anonymous tips that had neutralized Emma's bullies, the comprehensive surveillance system she'd built around their lives. "I was so lonely," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "After your grandfather died, I felt invisible, irrelevant. You all had your own lives, your own problems, and I couldn't help because I didn't understand your world. So I learned to understand it. I learned to speak your language." Emma moved. To sit on the arm of her grandmother's chair, her anger tempered by compassion. "Grandma, you violated our privacy. You hacked our school, manipulated our grades, read our private messages. That's not love. That's control." "I know," Meredith said, her voice breaking. "I know it's wrong, but Jake was failing, and Emma was being tormented, and none of you were talking to me about it. You were all suffering in silence, and I had the power to help. How could I not help?" Jake sat on the ottoman facing his grandmother, close enough to see the genuine anguish in her eyes. "You could have talked to us. You could have asked how we were doing, offered support, been there for us the normal way." "Would you have told me?" Meredith asked, her gaze moving between her grandchildren. "Really? Would you have admitted your struggles to the technologically hopeless old woman who couldn't even connect to Wi-Fi?" The question hit its mark. Both Emma and Jake knew that their grandmother was right. They'd dismissed her as irrelevant to their digital age problems, too old and out of touch to understand the pressures they faced. "That doesn't make what you did okay," Emma said, but her voice was softer now. "Grandma, you became really good at this stuff. Like, scary good. You could have used those skills to connect with us honestly instead of spying on us." "I was scared," Meredith admitted. "Scared that if I revealed what I'd learned, you'd be angry. Scared that if I stopped monitoring, something terrible would happen and I wouldn't be able to prevent it. Scared that without the surveillance, I'd become invisible again." Jake reached over and took his grandmother's hand. "You were never invisible, Grandma. We were just distracted, selfish. We took you for granted." "But we're not taking you for granted now," Emma added. "This conversation? This is the most real talk we've had as a family in months, because now we know you're actually paying attention, actually involved in our lives." Meredith looked between her grandchildren, seeing something she hadn't expected. Not just forgiveness, but respect. They were hurt by her violations of their privacy, yes, but they were also impressed by her technical skills, touched by her protective instincts, and ready to find a path forward that honored both their need for autonomy and her need for connection. "We have to tell Mom and Dad," Jake said eventually. "They need to know about the grade changes, the hacking, all of it." "I know," Meredith said, though the thought terrified her. "What I did, there could be legal consequences, for all of us." Emma squeezed her grandmother's shoulder. "We'll figure it out together, but Grandma, no more secret surveillance, no more digital manipulation. If you want to be part of our lives, really part of our lives, it has to be honest." "And maybe," Jake added with a small smile, "you could teach us some of that computer stuff. Legitimately. I could actually use help with chemistry, and Emma's always interested in cybersecurity." Meredith Williams looked at her grandchildren, really looked at them, without the filter of screens and surveillance data, and saw something she'd been searching for throughout this entire digital odyssey. Connection. Real, honest, messy, Complicated family connection that couldn't be manufactured through monitoring software or maintained through manipulation. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that very much." The road ahead would be difficult. Sarah and David would need to be told the truth, with all its legal and ethical implications. The school would need to be informed about the grade changes. The family would need to rebuild trust that had been fractured by good intentions and terrible choices. But for the first time in months, Meredith Williams felt like she was truly seeing her family, and they were truly seeing her. Not as the technologically hopeless grandmother or the invisible widow, but as a flawed, loving, complicated woman who'd made terrible mistakes in service of genuine love. The surveillance state of one was finally coming to an end. What would replace it remained to be seen, but it would be built on honesty instead of deception, connection instead of control. It would be real. The Thompson family living room had never felt smaller. Sarah sat rigidly on the edge of the couch, her marketing executive composure cracking with each revelation. David paced behind her, his IT professional mind struggling to process the technical impossibility of what he was hearing. Meredith occupied her usual chair, but instead of her customary invisibility, she was the unwilling center of attention as her children and grandchildren grappled with the magnitude of her digital deception. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Sarah said, her voice carrying the controlled fury of a woman trying not to explode in front of her children. "You've been hacking into school systems, manipulating grades, and surveilling my children for months, while I thought you were processing grief in therapy." "Sarah," Meredith began, but her daughter cut her off with a gesture that could have silenced a boardroom. "I'm not finished, Mother." Sarah stood, her hands shaking slightly. "You violated my children's privacy. You committed crimes using skills you learned while lying to me about your whereabouts. You manipulated academic records that could affect Jake's college admission, potentially putting his entire future at risk." David stopped pacing and turned to face his mother-in-law. "Meredith, I work in IT. I understand what kind of technical sophistication this would require. This isn't some grandmother accidentally discovering Facebook. You've been running a comprehensive surveillance operation." "I was protecting them," Meredith said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jake was failing. Emma was being tormented. And neither of you were paying attention because you were too busy with your own screens to notice your children were drowning." The accusation hit its mark. Sarah's face flushed, but whether from anger or guilt, it was impossible to tell. "That doesn't give you the right to what? To care? To solve problems?" Meredith's voice gained strength as her defensive instincts kicked in. "When was the last time you had a real conversation with Jake about his anxiety? When did you last notice that Emma was crying herself to sleep because of cyberbullies?" "That's not fair," David interjected, but his voice lacked conviction. The truth was that Meredith's surveillance had revealed problems that the parents had missed entirely, blind spots that their digital age parenting style had created. Emma, who had remained silent during the adult confrontation, finally spoke up. "She's not wrong about us not talking. But Grandma, you can't solve family communication problems by becoming Big Brother." Jake nodded, adding, "And the grade thing." "No, Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something. I was researching ways to hack the school system myself before Grandma did it. I was desperate enough to cheat because I was too scared to ask for help." Sarah sank back onto the couch, her anger momentarily displaced by the revelation of her son's struggles. "Jake, why didn't you come to us?" "Because you expect perfection," Jake said, his honesty cutting through the room's tension like a blade. "Both of you. Your success stories, your achievements, the way you talk about my future, it all adds up to this pressure where failure isn't an option. So when I started failing chemistry, I couldn't admit it, because admitting it meant disappointing you." David sat heavily in his chair, the weight of his son's words settling on his shoulders. "We never meant to make you feel that way." "But you did," Emma said, her 13-year-old directness uncomfortable but necessary. And when Grandma noticed our problems and actually did something about them, it felt better than being ignored. The room fell silent except for the sound of Meredith's quiet crying. She'd started this digital journey to prove her relevance, to bridge the generational gap that had made her feel invisible. Instead, she'd exposed the dysfunction that technology had both masked and amplified in her family's relationships. Sarah's phone buzzed with a notification, then David's, then Jake's, the electronic symphony that had become the soundtrack of their family life suddenly felt obscene in the context of their conversation. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Meredith said, gesturing at their instinctive reach for their devices. "Even now, in the middle of this crisis, you're all more connected to your phones than to each other." Sarah looked at her phone, then deliberately placed it face down on the coffee table. "You're right, but that doesn't excuse what you did. Mom, the grade changes alone could result in criminal charges. Academic fraud, computer crimes, privacy violations. Do you understand what you've put this family at risk of?" The legal implications had been weighing on Meredith's mind since her confession to the grandchildren. She'd researched the potential consequences with the same thoroughness she'd applied to surveilling her family, and the results were sobering. Felony charges were possible. Jake's college prospects could be destroyed not by his original failing grades, but by the scandal of grade manipulation. The family's reputation in their tight-knit Utah community could be permanently damaged. "There's something else," David said, his voice grim. "I got a call from Jake's chemistry teacher yesterday, Mrs. Anderson. She's noticed inconsistencies in the gradebook and is conducting her own investigation. She suspects academic fraud and is planning to involve the administration." The color drained from Jake's face. "What does that mean for college applications?" "It means," Sarah said, her marketing background kicking in as she began damage, "control calculations, that we need to get ahead of this before it spirals completely out of control. We need to confess everything to the school before they discover it themselves." "That could mean expulsion," Jake protested. "Criminal charges. My college acceptances could be revoked." "The alternative is worse," David said. "If they discover the fraud through their investigation, the consequences will be more severe than if we come forward voluntarily." Meredith felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. Her attempt to protect Jake had potentially destroyed his future. Her effort to solve problems had created far worse problems. Her digital omniscience had led to a reckoning that could tear her family apart. "This is my fault," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I'll confess to everything. I'll take full responsibility and make it clear that Jake had nothing to do with the grade changes." "Mom, you could go to prison," Sarah said, and for the first time since the confrontation began, her voice carried concern rather than anger. "Then that's what happens," Meredith replied. "I won't let my mistakes destroy Jake's future." Emma moved to sit beside her grandmother, taking the older woman's hand. "There has to be another way. Grandma made mistakes, but she was trying to help. And honestly, some of the problems she solved were things we should have been handling. As a family, anyway." The teenager's wisdom cut through the adult panic, forcing everyone to consider not just the crisis they faced, but the underlying issues that had created it. Meredith's digital surveillance had been wrong, but it had also revealed genuine problems that needed addressing regardless of legal consequences. "We need help," David said finally. "Professional help. Legal advice, family counseling, maybe even crisis management for the school situation." Sarah nodded, her executive training taking over. "And we need to figure out how to handle this as a family, together, instead of as individuals protecting our own interests." Jake looked around the room at his family, really looked at them, perhaps for the first time in months. "Whatever happens with the school stuff, I want us to actually talk to each other. Like, really talk. Not just logistics and schedules, but about real things. Like this conversation, but without the crisis. "I'd like that too," Meredith said, squeezing Emma's hand. "I learned your digital language, but I lost track of our human language in the process." David reached for his wife's hand, a gesture that felt both natural and revolutionary after months of parallel phone-focused existence. "Maybe we all did." The Thompson family sat in their living room, their devices silent for perhaps the first time in years, facing an uncertain future that would require honesty, courage, and the kind of real communication that couldn't be mediated through screens. The digital divide that had separated them had been bridged, but at a cost none of them had anticipated. The reckoning was just beginning, but for the first time in months, they would face it together. As a family united by something more substantial than Wi-Fi passwords and shared cloud storage accounts. They would face it with love, complicated, and flawed and genuine, transmitted not through fiber optic cables, but through the ancient technology of human connection. Marcus Webb's office at Salt Lake Community College had never hosted a family intervention before. The space, designed for one-on-one student conferences, felt cramped with 5 Thompson family members, a laptop displaying evidence of digital crimes, and the weight of decisions that would reshape their lives forever. "I have to admit," Marcus said, reviewing the comprehensive documentation Meredith had prepared, "this is the most sophisticated application of my curriculum I've ever encountered, and the most ethically problematic." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. 2 days had passed since their family reckoning, and she'd insisted on bringing in Marcus as both a technical consultant and, hopefully, a voice of reason who might help them navigate the minefield ahead. "We need to understand our options," Sarah said, "both legally and practically. The school investigation is moving forward, and we have maybe 48 hours before they discover the grade manipulation independently." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Meredith, may I ask why you documented everything so thoroughly? Most people committing academic fraud don't keep detailed logs of their activities." Meredith's voice was barely above a whisper. "I wanted to remember what I'd done for them. It felt like proof that I was still useful, still needed. I saved screenshots of their problems and my solutions like they were family photos." The confession hung in the air, revealing the depth of loneliness and displacement that had driven Meredith's digital crusade. Marcus nodded slowly, recognizing something in her words that the family was only beginning to understand. "The irony," he said gently, "is that the skills you've demonstrated make you incredibly valuable in legitimate contexts. Cybersecurity. Professionals with your combination of technical ability and analytical thinking are in high demand." David looked up from his phone, where he'd been researching legal precedents. "That doesn't change the fact that she committed multiple felonies." "No," Marcus agreed, "but it does suggest a path forward that might serve everyone's interests." He turned to address the family collectively. "You have 2 main options. Option 1, full confession, throw yourselves on the mercy of the school and legal system and hope for leniency. Option 2, strategic confession with a rehabilitation plan that demonstrates genuine commitment to making amends and preventing future violations." "What does option 2 look like?" Jake asked, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived. Marcus pulled up a document on his laptop. "I've been working on a proposal that acknowledges the violations while positioning Meredith as a case study in cybersecurity education. She voluntarily confesses to the grade manipulation, provides full documentation of her methods, and agrees to work with the school district to strengthen their digital security protocols." Emma leaned forward, her technical curiosity engaged. "She'd be helping them fix the vulnerabilities she exploited?" "Exactly. Ethical hacking, in reverse. Instead of just punishing the crime, we'd be addressing the systemic weaknesses that made it possible." Marcus looked at Meredith. "You'd essentially be donating your services to improve their cybersecurity infrastructure, while also serving..." As a cautionary tale about the importance of digital ethics, Sarah's marketing mind began working through the implications. That reframes the narrative from criminal grandmother to concerned family member who went too far, but is now helping prevent future incidents. There's precedent for this approach, Marcus continued. The cybersecurity community has a long tradition of reformed hackers becoming security consultants. The difference is that Meredith's motivations were protective rather than malicious, which makes her case more sympathetic. David was already thinking through the technical aspects. The school district's security is genuinely terrible. If Meredith could help them implement proper protocols, it would benefit thousands of students and families. Jake raised his hand tentatively, as if still in a classroom. What about the college application situation? If this goes public, won't it affect my admissions? Marcus nodded grimly. That's the biggest risk. Even with the best possible spin, colleges don't look kindly on academic fraud. But if we can demonstrate that you were unaware of the grade manipulation and that you're committed to academic integrity going forward. I want to retake the chemistry tests, Jake said suddenly. All of them. I want to earn whatever grade I actually deserve, and I want colleges to see that grade, not the fake ones. Meredith looked at her grandson with a mixture of pride and terror. Jake, that could mean failing the class. Your college applications are based on lies right now, Jake interrupted. I'd rather fail honestly than succeed because of fraud. And maybe I need to take a gap year anyway. Figure out what I actually want to study instead of just trying to meet everyone else's expectations. Sarah felt her chest tighten at the suggestion, but forced herself to consider it objectively. A gap year would give Jake time to genuinely improve his academic standing, address his anxiety issues, and approach college from a position of strength, rather than desperation. There's something else we need to discuss, Marcus said, his tone becoming more serious. The surveillance aspect of what happened. The grade manipulation is one thing, but the monitoring of private communications raises different legal and ethical issues. Emma nodded. The stuff with my cyberbullying situation, Grandma didn't just hack grades, she basically conducted a counterintelligence operation against middle schoolers. Which was effective, Marcus acknowledged, but which also involved accessing private accounts, collecting evidence without consent, and taking actions that could be considered vigilante justice. Meredith felt the weight of her choices settling on her shoulders like a heavy coat. I never thought of it as vigilante justice. I thought of it as grandmothering. The most comprehensive grandmothering in history, Emma said with a small smile that took some of the sting out of the observation. Marcus looked around the room at each family member. The school situation is manageable if we handle it correctly. The surveillance issues are more complex, but they're primarily civil rather than criminal matters. The real question is, what does this family want to look like going forward? Sarah took a deep breath. We want to be honest with each other. We want to solve problems together instead of hiding them. We want to use technology to connect, rather than to control or escape. David added, and we want Mom to be part of our lives in a way that honors her capabilities without crossing ethical boundaries. Jake nodded. I want to be able to ask for help when I'm struggling, without feeling like I'm disappointing everyone. Emma raised her hand. I want Grandma to teach me cybersecurity stuff, legitimately, because that was actually pretty impressive, even if it was totally wrong. All eyes turned to Meredith, who sat quietly for a moment before speaking. I want to stop being invisible, but I want to be visible for the right reasons, not because I'm manipulating situations from behind the scenes. Marcus smiled. Those are good goals, achievable goals. Now let's talk about how to make them reality while minimizing the legal and academic consequences of getting here. The next 2 hours were spent drafting a confession letter that acknowledged wrongdoing while proposing constructive remediation. They scheduled meetings with school administrators, researched family counseling options, and began planning what Sarah privately called Operation Honest Family, a comprehensive approach to rebuilding their relationships on foundations of genuine communication rather than digital surveillance. As they prepared to leave Marcus's office, Meredith felt something she hadn't experienced since Harold's death: hope. Not the desperate hope of someone clinging to relevance through technical manipulation, but the steady hope of someone who'd found a path forward that honored both her capabilities and her values. The consequences of her digital crusade would be significant. Jake might need to repeat his senior year. The family would face scrutiny from the school district and possibly law enforcement. Their reputation in the community would be forever changed. But they would face these consequences together, as a family that had learned to communicate honestly, to trust each other with their vulnerabilities, and to solve problems through collaboration rather than secretive manipulation. The healing had begun, and for the first time in months, Meredith Williams felt like she was exactly where she belonged, not watching her family from the digital shadows, but standing with them in the complicated, messy, beautiful light of honest relationship. 6 months later, Meredith Williams sat in her favorite coffee shop downtown, laptop open, reviewing security protocols for the Salt Lake City School District's new cybersecurity initiative. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who had once hacked their grade system was now being paid to strengthen their defenses against future digital intrusions. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Grandma, can you help me with my cybersecurity? Club presentation tonight? I want to make sure I explain SQL injection correctly." Meredith smiled as she typed back, "Of course, sweetheart. Come over after school and we'll go through it together." The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate. The school district's investigation had resulted in a suspended sentence and 200 hours of community service, all of which Meredith was completing through her work improving their digital infrastructure. Jake had indeed repeated several courses, spending an additional semester in high school to earn his grades honestly. The college acceptances had been deferred, but new ones had arrived. Schools that valued his honesty about his academic struggles and his commitment to genuine improvement. Most importantly, the family had learned to talk to each other. Sunday dinners had been revolutionized by what Emma jokingly called the Great Device Embargo. All phones, tablets, and laptops remained in a basket by the front door while the family actually conversed. The conversations weren't always comfortable, but they were real. Jake had opened up about his anxiety and was now working with a therapist. Emma had joined her school's cybersecurity club and was already showing aptitude that impressed even Marcus Webb. Sarah and David had implemented weekly check-ins with their children that went beyond logistics to include genuine emotional support. And Meredith had found her place in the family's digital ecosystem, not as a secret surveillance operator, but as their official ethical technology consultant. "Mrs. Williams?" A voice interrupted her work. She looked up to see Mrs. Anderson, Jake's former chemistry teacher, approaching with a coffee cup in hand. "Mrs. Anderson," Meredith replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Please, sit. How are you?" The teacher settled into the chair with a thoughtful expression. "I wanted to thank you, actually. The security improvements you've helped implement have already prevented 2 attempted grade hacks this semester. One of them was sophisticated enough that it would have succeeded under our old system." Meredith felt a familiar flush of pride, but this time it was clean, earned through legitimate contribution rather than digital manipulation. "I'm glad the work is making a difference." "It is, but I also wanted to tell you something about Jake." Mrs. Anderson paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "When he came to me last semester to confess about the grade changes and ask to retake all his exams, I was prepared to be angry. Academic integrity violations are serious business." "I know," Meredith said quietly. What we did was wrong." "Yes, it was. But Jake's approach to making amends impressed me. He didn't just want to retake the tests. He wanted to understand why he'd struggled in the first place. He spent hours in my office, working through concepts he'd missed, asking questions he'd been too proud to ask the first time around. Mrs. Anderson smiled. He earned a B+ in chemistry this semester, a real B+ through hard work and genuine understanding. And he's been tutoring other students who are struggling, sharing what he learned about asking for help when you need it. Meredith felt tears prick at her eyes. This was what she'd wanted all along, not to solve her family's problems through digital manipulation, but to help them find the strength to solve their own problems honestly. There's something else, Mrs. Anderson continued. Jake mentioned that you've been helping him with study strategies, time management, stress reduction. He said you've become the grandmother he always needed but was too distracted to notice. The words hit Meredith like a warm wave. Relevance, connection, purpose. Everything she'd sought through her digital crusade was now hers through simple, honest relationship. As Mrs. Anderson left to return to school, Meredith's phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, Mom," Sarah said, and Meredith could hear the smile in her voice. "I know you're working on the school district project, but I wanted to ask if you'd be interested in consulting on a cybersecurity initiative at my company. We're implementing new privacy protocols, and I immediately thought of you." "I'd be honored," Meredith replied, meaning it completely. "Great. Also, David wanted me to ask if you could help him with something at home. He's setting up a secure home network and wants to make sure we're following best practices. Apparently, having a cybersecurity expert in the family has its advantages." After the call ended, Meredith sat quietly for a moment, processing how dramatically her life had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been a lonely widow desperately seeking relevance through digital manipulation. Now she was a contributing member of her family and community, using her hard-won technical skills to solve problems legitimately and transparently. Her laptop chimed with a video call request from Jake, who was now a freshman at the University of Utah, studying computer science with a focus on cybersecurity ethics. "Hey, Grandma," Jake said as his face appeared on her screen. "I'm working on a paper about the ethics of white hat hacking, and I was wondering if I could interview you about your unique perspective on crossing digital boundaries." Meredith laughed. "You want to interview me about my criminal past? I want to interview you about redemption, about how someone can use their mistakes to make positive contributions. My professor says your case study is already being used in cybersecurity ethics courses at other universities." The conversation that followed was rich and complex, touching on themes of privacy, protection, the corrupting nature of secret power, and the possibility of redemption through service. Jake's questions were thoughtful and challenging, treating his grandmother not as the technologically hopeless woman she'd once pretended to be, but as a complex individual whose experiences had valuable lessons to offer. As evening approached, Meredith closed her laptop and prepared to head home. Emma would be arriving soon for their cybersecurity tutoring session, followed by dinner with Sarah and David, and a family movie night that would feature actual conversation during the boring parts. Walking to her car, Meredith reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The digital crusade that had begun with hurt feelings and desperate loneliness had nearly destroyed her family through deception and manipulation. But the crisis it created had also forced them to confront problems they'd been avoiding, to develop communication skills they'd never needed before, and to discover that love, real love, required vulnerability rather than control. She thought about Harold, about what he would say if he could see her now. He'd always believed in her intelligence, her capability, her potential to grow and adapt. But he'd also valued honesty, integrity, and the kind of love that trusted rather than surveilled. "You finally found your way, Mare," she could almost hear him saying. "Took you a while, but you got there." As Meredith Williams drove home through the familiar streets of Salt Lake City, her phone silent in her purse instead of pinging with surveillance alerts, she felt something she'd been searching for throughout her entire digital journey: peace. Not the peace of someone who controlled every variable, but the peace of someone who was loved, needed, and valued for exactly who she was. The technologically hopeless grandmother was gone forever, replaced by someone far more dangerous and far more wonderful. A woman who had learned to use her considerable abilities in service of love rather than control, connection rather than manipulation, wisdom rather than mere power. The future stretched ahead, full of legitimate challenges and honest relationships, secured not by password-protected surveillance systems, but by the ancient encryption of family bonds forged through truth, tested by crisis, and strengthened by forgiveness. Meredith Williams had finally learned the most important technology of all: how to be present in her own life and in the lives of the people she loved most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.